Welcome once again. I'm Brian Lepask, Chief of Program Services at OPSC. With me today is Tracy Sharp, Operations Manager in Program Services. We also have Joshua Potter and Michael Watanabe here for support. We'll be facilitating today's meeting and opening it up for questions and answers after the presentation. We have, like I said, just one topic today, which is the continued discussion of the 5-year master plan. If you'll remember, we had meetings on this topic earlier this year in February, April, and August. We've really put a lot of thought and careful attention into this topic. We're very proud of what we're presenting to you today. We've been working really hard to balance between the requirements for the master plan outlined in the statutory framework and making the master plans feasible and as easy as possible to complete and submit. It's been quite a balancing act, but I believe we're getting really close to a place that fulfills the needs and requirements while also having the support in place needed to complete these plans. And I really think the plans are going to be a really wonderful planning tool. They are going to illuminate the facility needs within the district, and they should provide you with a bit of a roadmap and help you prioritize your plan for future projects. Well, all of us at OPSC have been working hard on this topic. All of you that have sent in feedback, raised your hands, spoken up, commented, sent in written material. Those things have been integral to arriving at the point that we're at right now. And as I've said many times throughout these Proposition 2 implementation meetings, there's been a lot this year. We can't do it without your perspective and your input. So we are genuinely thankful and happy to have you all as our partners in this journey. So it's been a lot this year, but it's been very successful, and I think we should be proud what we've created together. So Tracy is going to be presenting the item today, and really we're kind of feeling like we're heading into finalizing mode on this one. We've worked through the bulk of the details. Today we'll be focusing on the feedback we received at the August meeting. As they are outlined in our item. We got a lot of really good feedback again. And after that, we're going to shift our focus to some of the regulation changes we've added to our proposal since the last meeting. There's not a lot. There are some things, but there's not a whole lot. The reg changes we have today, different from last time, are related to edits really intended to create more uniformity in references and language throughout the document. We're also clarifying some timeframes when the master plans must be submitted for the different types of applications you might have. And then there's just some other, I would maybe say they're non-substantive cleanup or clarifying language in certain areas where we're not changing the approach or the policy. It's really just, we saw opportunities to improve our prior proposals and to be a little bit more clear and make the wording a little more easy to understand. So there's some changes like that as well. We're also presenting again our checklist and our proposed certification changes and guidelines. These haven't really changed since the last meeting, but again, we're just presenting them here for you to review again today. So as you can see, today's changes and updates are fairly light, although there is still a good amount to cover. But we definitely wanted to make sure we're being thorough and wanted to give everyone at least one more opportunity to get a really good view of this item in whole, and have another discussion before we move it on down the road to the state allocation board for approval, and then ultimately into the rulemaking process to make it all official. So we're getting there. Thank you for being here today, spending your valuable time with us. Remember to use the Q&A function in the Zoom and/or raise your hand. We'll also be posting a recording of this meeting to our OPSC YouTube channel, which is OPSCU. So if you're watching this after the live meeting here today, there's still plenty of time, most likely anyway. For a couple weeks, we'll be accepting feedback. So, and even after that, if you have feedback, just go ahead and send it in. We just like to get it as quick as possible so we can turn it around for the next meeting or maybe for the board item. We'll see. So with that, thanks again for being here, and I will be turning it over to Tracy.
Thank you, Brian. As Brian said, my name is Tracy Sharp. I'm an operations manager here with OPSC. And as I'm getting my screen ready to share, I will be sharing the item as I am presenting it today. I noticed the date. We are exactly 1 year today from this statute becoming operative, and which, passage of the voters last year on November 5th. It became operative on November 6th. And so I thought that was kind of cool to be um, sharing this very close to final version of the 5-year master plan on November 6th. 1 year later, I have to echo Brian's comments about the incredible participation and collaboration that we've got in this past year to get where we are today with multiple regulation packages completed through with your support. I have to include thank you to my OPSC colleagues as we work through this. So just kind of want to double comment on what Brian said in that regard. And then the bulk or a chunk of this presentation is to start with the stakeholder feedback, going over that because that has been a core element of this process of presenting these items. So without further ado, I will jump into the stakeholder feedback. Just again, to reiterate format of today's meeting, I'll start with the feedback received and go over those. And then we'll look at the clarifying changes that we've made to the master plan submittal timelines chart. There were a couple of stakeholder comments that we'll be going over that prompted us to make some clarifications to the language in those. The intended dates and due dates didn't change. We just want to make sure that the way we present it, that we have a common understanding of the timeline requirements that are presented both in the charts and also in the proposed regulatory language. So we'll be looking at those as well. So I will move on. I have a screen share here of the item itself. Brian, can you confirm, or one of the other participants, that you can see my screen?
And good to go.
Okay, thank you, Joshua. I appreciate that very much. So as you can see, as usual in our item, we have links to our prior 3 meetings on the topic. We opened this up earlier this year on February 13th, met again on April 10th, and then our most recent meeting was August 28th. And these comments that we'll be going over are largely the result of, or came in after that August 28th meeting. So we received a total of 5 letters, but we've kind of broken them up by subject matter. So it might look like there are 10, but in the attachments with this item that start on the PDF page 116 of 131 pages, you'll see actually 5 letters. And one of the first letters raised a question that helped us see that a clarification was needed on the submittal timelines charts and proposed regulations regarding the requirements for when a district would submit a 5-year master plan if it had received design and or site funding, and then followed up with submitting a full grant application for funding. And this is the time frame that would be from now, when the regulations are not in effect yet, until 12 months after the regulations take effect, that time period. The intent originally and now is that phased apportionments, such as a site and design, or say a charter preliminary apportionment or small school district program preliminary funding applications, will not trigger a requirement to submit a 5-year master plan. When those applications come in, the district would only be required to submit the local governing board resolution, acknowledging the requirement to submit the master plan in accordance with when that full grant application for the project is submitted to OPSC. So the real trigger of submitting that master plan is when the full grant application is submitted. So when we get to the overview of the proposed regulations and also to looking at the timeline charts, I'll point out the updated wording that we have in there that hopefully then puts us on this path of, like I say, a common understanding of that requirement. So want to make sure that that's clear, that it's really the full grant application whenever that comes in, if it's before the regulations take effect or within that 12-month period after, or when it's passes the 12 months after regs are in effect. That's the trigger point, and that's what an applicant would follow in the charts and in the regs as far as determining, well, when will my 5-year master plan be really required to be submitted? So that is for item number 1 here. In this next item, or next number 2, the stakeholder provided a number of suggestions for additional information to be added to the inventory requirements portion of the 5-year master plan. Some of the requirements suggested were related to central air conditioning, tree shade, and assessment of air quality, and adding some additional certifications on the form, the new form 50 MP, related to climate impact projections, documentation of community engagement, and also had suggestions related to stormwater management. And this stakeholder also recommended that additions to the master plan guidelines document in chapters 3 and 4. So it's just kind of a light summary of what is included in that full letter. We appreciate those suggestions very much, and definitely acknowledge their importance in school facility planning and development. In regards to the inventory, we have elected to align the regulations as closely as possible to the statute. So you'll notice that our the proposed regulations that we presented last time and this time very closely mirror the statute, and only in a few places did we add some clarifying language for different types of facilities in the inventory portion. So with that in mind, we have the companion guidelines document where further options that districts can consider when doing their master planning and discussing options for their community are incorporated in the guidelines document. Specifically, we did add third-party resources in the appendix. And so for this stakeholders' suggestions, we've, again, added more information to the guidelines document. And the purpose, or in part the purpose of that guidelines document, is to help guide a district, obviously, of what they're required to do by statute and by regulation. And then, of course, these additional options they have to expand their master planning activities using those recommendations and options presented in the guidelines document. Okay, so moving on to another letter that we received. This stakeholder requested clarification by what is meant by the phrase instructional purposes that appears in the statute and also in the proposed regulations, and asked whether or not this would include libraries, food service areas, and multi-purpose rooms. And in looking into a further explanation for that, we noted, well, as I mentioned, we noticed that that phrase comes directly from the Ed Code, subsection 17070.54. It is included in subsection C1 and in D, which are the sections requiring the inventory of facilities, and specifically mentions libraries and multipurpose rooms as these types of facilities that should be included. And while statute doesn't specifically define instructional spaces, define instructional purposes, we found a couple other references that might be helpful in understanding this term. In DSA's administrative code, there's a reference to instructional purposes and related to school buildings, and also a recommendation in CDE's Guide to Development of Long-Range Facilities Plan, which support OPSC's intention to recommend that all facilities be included in the district's master plan, inclusive of closed sites. In their complete inventory. And that's mentioned in the end of our response there, as I mentioned, as a recommended inclusion. Okay, moving on to number 4. In this one, the stakeholder recommended that we make a clarification to the proposed regulation section 1859.18.1 in F1 regarding the due date for master plans following receipt of a natural disaster funding assistance or funding application. And after we got that comment and looked at our language, we did notice that the word complete was left out of the sentence there in that particular reg section. And we took a second look at that requirement as a whole and elected to maintain the requirement that a district would submit a master plan no later than the due date for the 100% complete Form 5006. In keeping that language for 100% complete, it ensures that the master plan wouldn't be submitted later than 100% complete Form 5006 when it's submitted. Sometimes a district might be in a situation where they can submit sooner than that, their 100% complete expenditure report. So we want to make sure that that master plan would be submitted concurrent with it and not after the 100% complete 5006. So we've maintained some of that language and edited it just a little bit to be more clear. So on item number 5 is similar to number 3 in that clarification is requested as to what facilities must be included in the required inventory of facilities portion of the master plan. And I'll point back to subsection D of the statute, where it only references school sites in that section. And while the statute limits it to school sites, OPSC recommends inclusion of all facilities in the district to demonstrate a complete evaluation of facilities that exist within the district. And we make this recommendation in the guidelines. Okay, moving on to number 6. And for number 6, I'm going to kind of partner this with the response in number 10, in that this stakeholder expressed concern that requiring pupil capacity by grade level might be overly complex, especially in cases where there's mixed grade levels on a particular school site. And they made a suggestion to revise the 50 NP to allow capacity reporting based on SFP loading ratios used for grants and education code compliance. And so our response is to, in this case, point to the ed code requirement in section 1707054C2 that references 2 other portions of ed code. And those 2 other portions of ed code are are basically the source and authority for SFP loading ratios and talk about existing capacity at a school site, within the district. Sorry, I spoke there. Which is reiterated in 1859.18D3. And we give the loading standards here in our item. However, at the same time, there is another section of statute, and which also appears in regulation, and it's represented in item number 10, which refers to total pupil capacity in section 1859.18, little d 2d. And I'm actually going to hop to that section of the regs to point out the difference here. It might be easier if we actually look at it. So what I've jumped to is page 21 in our regs, where if we look at, for reference, where we are, this is the inventory requirements portion of the regulations. And here in this line that I have highlighted, as part of the inventory, a district would include the pupil capacity of each school listed in the inventory by grade level, including special day class, non-severe, and severe pupils. So this part is part of your inventory. And it's language that matches the statute. So basically, in this section, for purposes of the inventory, the district would have flexibility to report their pupil capacity based on local loading standards, if they choose to, by classroom. And we have said in our response that a district could consider basically choosing the grade level that best represents that classroom, maybe by how it's used, majority of the day or something. However, the requirement in number 3 specifically points to, as I mentioned a moment ago, these Ed Code statutes that have a different purpose. Basically, you are following SFP loading standards for this purpose. And the intention of number 3 is more intended for determining your future grant possibilities or projected grant amounts for the SFP. So different purposes for these two sections. This one is part of the inventory. This one would be more about helping you to determine your projected future grants that you might be able to request from the school facility program. All right, so I'm going to jump back then. Hopefully that's clear. We can go into it further in the questions if you like later. And if we would also say we will take a second look at our guidelines document and make sure that those instructions are clear in there. Oops. And here we get back to where we left off with number 7. Item number 7, we say thank you to the stakeholder who noted that it would be best to change our references from enrollment growth to enrollment change. And we acknowledge and thank you for that, that note. And you'll see in the proposed regulations in section D4 that we've updated that so that it's broader language, not to assume only growth. It's any change in enrollment would be reported. Then in number 8, the stakeholder asked for clarification of the 5-year period of validity of the plan. And for clarity, OPS, we're confirming that yes, the master plan will be considered valid 5 years from the date of the local governing board approval. And then in number 9, kind of a similar note, the stakeholder asked for clarification of when we would accept a master plan. And in our response, we clarified that districts should be following the submittal timelines presented in the tables that will start on page 11 and in the corresponding proposed regs. We acknowledge that some districts may be submitting multiple applications, and therefore the master plan submittal date would be dependent on the first application that triggers it, that is submitted. And we've already covered number 10, so I'm going to pass over those. Next in our item, we have a summary of the proposed regulations, and I just wanted to check, Brian, are there any questions or anything that we want to pause for now, or should I keep going?
Sure. Actually, yeah, there's a couple questions that I can respond to in the Q&A. The first one is, the example on page 56 assumes a sunny forecast for enrollment growth. Suppose the district had recently consistently declining enrollment. Would it be appropriate to specify static enrollment figures with reasons for the declining enrollment, non-public school attendance, and low birth rates? So to answer that question, I think you should report your actual enrollment. That'd be accurate to what you're actually experiencing. That said, if you wanted to include reasoning for why you think it's declining, or things that you're aware of, that's certainly okay. It's not a requirement though, but it is a requirement to report your enrollment. So I think that should be accurate. So I hope that helps with that one. Another question, according to the 10/22/25 SAB agenda, the mod ARBA list starts, the applications received beyond bond authority list starts with the applications received on 10/30/24, meaning that the facilities master plan requirements will apply to new construction applications on the workload list. Correct. Is it possible that once the small school district program opens and qualifying applicants reapply, the workload list will eventually be revised? Yes, we will revise them, especially if there are projects that are going to migrate over to the small school district program. Once we know that a small school district program application is within the authority available in the small school district program, if there's a corresponding application on the workload list or the ARBA list, we'll remove them from that. So yes, those lists will be revised as projects that are within the authority in the small school district program are accepted and, basically into the new small school district funding rounds. So
Right.
I hope that helps as well. Yeah, please go ahead.
I'm going to give a quick plug to our proposed December next meeting on small schools, where we're going to get into some of the details on how that's going to work. We've received some feedback for consideration too. So
yes,
definitely a stay tuned for that process and consideration of some things that were submitted.
Exactly. Yeah, there'll be more details and even some regulations on those points, but those lists will change theoretically anyway if there's projects that migrate over. So those are all the questions we have at the moment.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'm glad I paused. It was helpful to touch on those timely. So yeah, just as I mentioned earlier, I want to take a brief overview here, and I've highlighted some things in the charts. We're continuing to include these charts in our items so that you have an at a glance and for when things are due. And the goal is, of course, these should be mirroring the language in the regulations. So as mentioned earlier, we got some requests for clarification. So here, in regards to new construction and mod applications for full grant, this will be including projects where a district has already received their separate design and site. And as I mentioned earlier, it is the full grant application that will trigger or determine when it's submitted, when the due date is. So if it's 12 months after the regulations are in effect, we're going to require that local board reso at time of application, and then the master plan would be due within 90 days of notification of application processing, like we do currently for other updates and requests for detailed cost estimates and 5001s if required, for if it's a new construction app. And if it's after 12 months, the regs have been in effect, then it's when the full grant app is submitted to OPSC. They come in concurrently. Then moving on here to next page, we have clarified a difference here with new requests. Basically, when it's specifically a new construction or modernization application for design and or site funding, we've basically said here to make it clear that the board reso is required with that site and or design funding app, but that master plan requirement is not yet triggered. So when the full grant application comes in. Then another element that we spoke to in the Q&A, in the feedback responses, is we've elected to update the language here just a little bit, and this is in regards to the facility hardship and seismic mitigation program apps, to remove references to substantial progress, which is a requirement in the program, but to make it a little more plain and basically just say within 18 months of fund release, or if or concurrently with the 100% complete expenditure report. If that is submitted sooner than 18 months, then that master plan would come in concurrent with that 5006. This could happen if a district has a reimbursement project and they're able to submit that 100% complete 5006 earlier than the 3 or 4 year timeline, or excuse me, earlier than the 18-month timeline. Scratch the 3 or 4, sorry. So at least within 18 months of fund release. Moving on here to CTE applications, similar to the above, within 18 months of fund release. CTE applications have their own path depending on how the application is submitted and their own timelines. But we're focusing this requirement, as with the others, on within 18 months of the fund release. And Joint Powers Authority applicants are exempt from this requirement. It applies to COEs and school districts only. Here we have the charter school facility program requirements, which has 2 different categories. Basically, we have applications that are still converting to a final apportionment. So if we get your final apportionment request on or after October 31st of last year, if it's still coming in, then it's within 18 months of the fund release, or with that final 50 or the 100% complete 5006. And then we have a new round, obviously, that just started. And so moving forward, when the district submits their full grant final apportionment request, the master plan would be submitted concurrently with that. Our small school district program, which we're still in process as far as formulating those final regulations. When districts are submitting that preliminary apportionment proposed as a Form 5012, they're just going to submit their local board resolution acknowledging that the complete master plan will be due upon submittal of that full grant application using the Form 5004. And then for the natural disaster assistance program, which is new as well, districts again will submit that local board resolution acknowledging that the master plan requirement is due by the time we get their 100% complete Form 5006. Okay. So now that we've looked at the charts, I want to just highlight a few changes in the actual regulations. And those, I'm going to hop to page 21. So throughout this item, kind of just belts and suspenders for consistency. Anywhere that previously it might have said a complete master plan, a couple of places it might have said a valid master plan to be consistent with other school facility program regulation language. We've added the words complete and valid to designate that it must be a complete and valid master plan that's coming in. So you'll see that throughout. I've highlighted a few examples in my screen share here, just so you see what changes we made. And then, as I mentioned in the Q&A section or the stakeholder feedback section, here in number 4, where we had previously said projected enrollment growth, we've changed that to projected enrollment changes. And then we spoke earlier to the difference between pupil capacity here in D and 3, no changes there, just that further explanation. And then in section 1859.18.1, our plan submittal timeframes, you will see a few changes here for the complete and valid language. And then we've sort of retooled the section about design and site funding so that it is reflective of what you saw in the charts, that it's only required to submit that governing board resolution, and then the date of submittal of the full grant funding application will be the trigger the requirement. So that's that regulation text. There's some additional changes that we are proposing to our actual funding applications. And I'm going to hop to page 96. So this is the very end of the Form 5004. And you'll see that in the item here, we have a complete version of the Form 5004. It was recently updated via board action and submittal of some new or other regulations coming on board. We do our best to have the most recent version in our stakeholder items, but this might be the most recent version. I apologize, I don't remember. But in any case, when it goes to the board, it will be reflective of the most recent version. So on the 5004, you'll notice we're proposing an additional certification for the authorized district rep or superintendent. And this certification gives that signator the opportunity to indicate the status of the master plan. Basically to certify that there have been no material changes. There have been material changes, and we can expect to see that. Or this application is subject to an alternative master plan submittal timeline, and there's a governing board resolution attached to it. So this certification, and we would expect the signator to check one of the boxes as appropriate, is appearing. We have included in our package here not only the standard application for funding Form 5004, we also have the preliminary apportionment or preliminary application for preliminary apportionment for the charter program, the Form 5009, and that shows up on page 102 of the PDF. We have the Career Technical Education Facilities Program application, the same certification showing up there, and also the SAB 195 for the Natural Disaster Assistance Program application included in this package to demonstrate that this certification would be added, is proposed to be added to each of these funding applications. So that, and in our package, we've also included in our meeting report here, the Form 50 MP, but there are no changes proposed to that at this time. It's just included for completeness. So before I jump to a few comments on the guidelines document, are there any other questions, Brian, that we want to pause for here?
There's none in our Q&A right now, or none in the chat. So we can monitor, but I don't see any at the moment.
Okay, then I will finish up here with just a few comments about the guidelines document. Okay, so we included the guidelines document here under a separate cover, just to distinguish it between the proposed regulations and the guidelines, which is not a regulatory item. It is required that we develop it per Prop 2, but it is not regulatory. And since the last stakeholder meeting, we've made some relatively minor clarifications and additions to the guidelines to align them with the current proposed regulations. And in recognition that, as I mentioned, the guidelines are non-regulatory, we will present them to the board for acceptance and approval. We wanted to note that revisions to the guidelines can be ongoing. They're intended to be a living document that, if new policies, programs, changes occur, we get new information that would be helpful to districts, or additional feedback as time goes by, that we can incorporate them and not have to go through the full regulatory process to update them. And this would include additional components that beyond those that are required by the statute. So we appreciate the additional information provided and recognize value, and we'll, like I say, continue to add those to the guidelines as time goes by, as they're not prescriptive like regulations are. We can expand on options of and include the required components and explanations for options how districts can meet the required components. There's also opportunities for recommendations for districts to consider. So for a quick overview of what changed in the current guidelines, in the timelines portion, Chapter 1, we've updated it to reflect the clarifying language in the charts presented earlier and the proposed regulations. In Guidelines Chapter 2, it previously, because we hadn't drafted the regulations yet, was written with the focus on the statutory requirements. We've now updated that to the regulatory requirements and included both in there, so that now the guidelines will include references throughout to the proposed regulation sections as they've been presented so far. And then so you'll see that update throughout. And then the appendices have been expanded to provide specific sections on state agency resources and other additional resources. So the state agency resources section includes additional agency websites that were recommended by stakeholders that might be helpful in completing your plan. And then in the additional resources section, we have a bibliography of stakeholders who have contributed feedback to the master plan topic overall, as well as a number of external links that are provided for information purposes. Just to note, though their inclusion doesn't reflect any endorsement by OPSC. We're sharing information that was shared with us for districts to explore further. So I think that covers everything in our item today. and I'll open it up to any other questions and stop sharing my screen unless there's something specific we want to point to.
Thank you. Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, still a lot of things to look over and cover, but we're really just refining at this moment. So I don't see any questions currently in the chat, and I don't believe anybody has their hand raised. We will leave it open for a bit here, just to see if any questions or comments come in, though. So give you a few minutes to formulate those, if you have them. And again, you can always send in written comments if you didn't have a chance to really look at the item very thoroughly prior to the meeting. There's some things on your mind, you want to send it in to us, we're happy to accept those. There's information in the item about where to send it, but you can always just email it over to one of us or to our communications team, and we'll definitely make sure that we consider all of it and respond as needed to any of those comments. A little bit of that awkward silence. I don't see any questions coming in, so I'll give it one more minute here. See if there's anything that comes across. Yes, Jessica Manson. Oh, she had her hand up and she took it down. We do appreciate everybody being here. Thank you for all of your help with this item and all of the other ones. We will be having at least one more meeting this year. I think probably just one. I could be wrong on that, but we'll be announcing those in the near future when they'll be happening. And I'm seeing nothing, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you all for your attention today. Thank you for spending your time with us. I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you again sometime very soon.